It was a quiet evening at the elegant restaurant tucked in the heart of the city, the kind of place where crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling and polished wooden tables reflected the warm golden light. The atmosphere usually hummed with the soft murmur of conversations and the clinking of glasses, creating a calm and sophisticated backdrop for the evening. Among the staff, a young waitress moved gracefully between tables, carrying trays with ease and a polite smile that never faltered. She was known among her colleagues for being diligent and thoughtful, the kind of person who remembered small details about regular customers and always made sure everyone felt welcome. Her life outside of work was quiet, almost invisible. She lived in a small apartment not far from the restaurant, with only a few cherished possessions and memories that gave her comfort. Music had always been a private world for her, a secret talent she had nurtured in the solitude of her room. The piano, a relic left behind by her family, was her companion during long nights when the city was asleep and her heart needed an outlet. She could spend hours coaxing melodies from the keys, each note a reflection of her thoughts, emotions, and dreams. No one at work knew about this side of her life. She kept it private, a personal sanctuary where she felt alive and free. This particular evening, the restaurant was bustling with guests, more than usual for a weekday. The tables were occupied by a mix of familiar patrons and a few new faces who clearly belonged to the world of wealth and influence. Their conversations were lively but polite, the kind that mixed business talk with casual laughter. The young waitress moved efficiently, her steps almost choreographed from years of experience. She delivered plates with precision, refilled drinks without disturbing the diners, and navigated the crowded room with a quiet confidence that only came from deep familiarity with the space. As she made her rounds, she noticed a small commotion near the piano in the corner. A few guests had gathered, curious glances exchanged, murmuring among themselves. The piano, though not often used, was a grand piece, its black lacquered surface gleaming under the soft lights. The manager approached, looking slightly anxious, and glanced around for someone to play. It was clear that the evening needed music, but the scheduled performer was nowhere in sight. The young waitress paused, her hands tightening slightly around the tray she carried. She had played in private countless times, but the idea of performing in front of this crowd made her heart race. The manager noticed her hesitation and hesitated for only a moment before saying something that caught her completely off guard. He asked her, gently yet insistently, if she could play. The request was simple, but it carried weight. The wealthy guests had expectations, and the atmosphere would change entirely if the music didn't come to life. Her mind raced with doubt and fear. What if she made a mistake? What if they laughed or looked down on her? The thought of judgment made her stomach twist into knots. But alongside the fear, there was a spark of something else. Excitement, curiosity, and a quiet determination. She had spent so many nights alone, letting the piano speak for her in ways words never could. Perhaps tonight was the night to share that secret, to let the music tell the story she had kept locked inside. She took a deep breath, placed the tray on the nearest table, and walked toward the piano with careful steps. Each footfall seemed louder than usual, echoing in her mind as she approached the polished instrument. She sat down on the piano bench, feeling the coolness of the keys under her fingers. The room fell into a subtle silence, the chatter dimming as a few guests noticed what was happening. She hesitated for a brief moment, closing her eyes and letting herself feel the music already playing in her mind. Then, softly, she pressed a key, and a single note resonated clearly across the room. It was not grand or showy, just a simple, honest sound that seemed to blend naturally with the ambience. The note hung in the air, a gentle invitation for the evening to transform. She continued, her fingers finding their rhythm, guiding the melody as it unfolded naturally. At first, the guests paid little attention, absorbed in their conversations. But gradually, the room began to notice. Conversations softened, laughter dimmed, and curious eyes turned toward the piano. There was something compelling about the way she played, a sincerity that could not be faked. Each chord seemed to tell a story, each rise and fall of the melody carrying emotions that were palpable even to those who didn't understand music deeply. The waitress did not play for recognition or praise. She played because it was the truth she had always held close. Her fingers moved with ease and confidence, guided by years of practice and a deep understanding of the instrument. The melody shifted, becoming richer, more intricate, yet never losing its natural flow. There was a magic in the way she connected with the piano, as if the keys themselves responded to her touch and emotion. The guests began to lean in, drawn not only to the sound but to the presence of the performer who seemed completely absorbed in her music. Among the crowd, the wealthy patrons who were used to having attention commanded and entertainment tailored for them, found themselves captivated by this unexpected performance. There was no pretense, no attempt to impress, only the pure expression of talent and emotion. The simplicity of her approach made it all the more powerful. It was not flashy, but it was breathtaking. Eyes widened, heads tilted, and a hush settled over the room, punctuated only by the resonant notes of the piano. In the midst of the performance, the waitress felt a strange mix of vulnerability and empowerment. She had exposed a part of herself that no one had ever seen, and yet it felt natural, like the most honest thing she could do. Her hands moved effortlessly across the keys, the music flowing from her mind through her heart to her fingers. She forgot about the crowd, the expectations, and even her fear. There was only the music and the moment, a perfect harmony between her inner world and the space around her. By the time she played the final notes of the first piece, the atmosphere in the restaurant had changed completely. What had begun as a routine evening had transformed into something memorable. The guests, silent for a brief moment, began to clap, softly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. The manager watched with a mixture of relief and awe, realizing that the young waitress had not only filled the gap left by the absent performer, but had elevated the entire evening to an experience none of the patrons would forget. As she rose from the piano bench, her hands still tingling from the touch of the keys, a few guests approached her, offering words of admiration. Some were curious about her background, others simply wanted to express how much the music had moved them. She smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the lights or the attention, but with the quiet satisfaction of having shared something deeply personal and beautiful. That night, she returned to her duties, carrying herself with a new confidence, aware that something inside her had shifted. The piano had spoken, and in doing so, it had introduced the world to a talent that had been quietly waiting for its moment to shine. The evening continued, but for many in the restaurant, it would forever be remembered as a night unlike any other. Not because of the luxury or the wealth in the room, but because of a humble waitress who, for a brief but unforgettable time, allowed her music to captivate the hearts of everyone around her. She walked among the tables, serving food and drink as she always had, yet now there was a quiet recognition in the way people looked at her. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. They had witnessed something rare, something genuine, something human. And in that recognition, the waitress found a new sense of possibility. The piano had always been her refuge, a place where she could be herself completely. Now it had become a bridge, connecting her to the world outside her private life in a way she had never imagined. She realized that perhaps the music she loved so deeply could touch others too, could inspire, move, and create memories. That night, she had stepped out of the shadows of routine and into a light that was gentle, welcoming, and entirely earned. It was a night to remember, not for the grandeur of the setting or the wealth surrounding her, but for the undeniable truth that talent, passion, and heart could speak louder than any expectation, status, or spoken word. After the first soft notes drifted across the restaurant, a quiet anticipation hung in the air. Guests who had been engaged in conversations now found themselves glancing toward the piano, curiosity and surprise evident on their faces. The young waitress, though still nervous, felt a strange calm settling over her. The fear that had tightened her chest only moments before began to loosen as she realized that her music was drawing people in. Every note she played seemed to invite the audience to listen more closely, to step into the story she had been holding inside for so long. The manager, standing a little way off, watched with a mixture of relief and admiration. He knew this night had started to take on a life of its own. The absence of a professional musician had caused concern, but now, with the waitress playing, the restaurant seemed to glow with a renewed energy. The wealthy patrons who had arrived with high expectations were beginning to lean in, their polite smiles now replaced with genuine interest. Some sat forward, elbows resting lightly on tables, eyes fixed on the piano, as if trying to anticipate what would come next. The waitress sensed the shift and felt her own confidence grow, though she remained humble and focused on the music rather than the attention. A few of the guests whispered among themselves, their voices low, carrying tones of surprise and admiration. They had not expected such talent from someone in her position. There was no showmanship, no attempt to dominate the room. Only pure, honest music that spoke directly to the emotions. Each chord she struck seemed to resonate not just in the ears of the listeners but in their hearts. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others leaned slightly toward the piano, eager to catch every subtle note and nuance. As she continued, the melody began to transform. What started as a gentle, simple tune slowly evolved into something more complex, with layers of harmony and rhythm that revealed the depth of her skill. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, yet every motion was fluid and natural. It was clear that she was not simply playing from memory. She was composing in the moment, allowing her emotions to guide the performance. There was a vulnerability in the music that made it all the more powerful, as if she were sharing a piece of herself with every person in the room. The atmosphere of the restaurant changed entirely. What had been a formal dining experience began to feel like a shared moment, a quiet gathering connected by music. Even the most reserved patrons, those who were used to maintaining composure in public, were visibly affected. Some tapped their fingers lightly on the tables, keeping time with the rhythm. Others swayed subtly, as if carried along by the melody. The waitress noticed these reactions, her heart lifting with a mixture of pride and humility. She had always played for herself, yet now she saw that her music had the power to touch others. Among the crowd, a few guests whispered questions, wondering how she had acquired such talent. It was unusual, unexpected, and completely captivating. Their curiosity was tinged with admiration, and a few even exchanged looks of disbelief. It was rare for someone so young and so quiet to command such attention simply through the piano. The young waitress remained focused, her eyes occasionally flicking to the sheet music she had placed on the stand, but mostly she relied on memory and instinct. Each piece she played told a story, with crescendos and pauses carefully woven to evoke emotion and reflection. The guests began to relax into the music, letting go of the tension and chatter that had filled the room earlier. The clinking of glasses and soft laughter faded, replaced by an attentive silence that was almost tangible. Even the waitstaff, moving quietly among the tables, paused for a moment, listening in awe. The young waitress was no longer just a server. She had become the centerpiece of the evening, the source of a shared experience that transcended wealth and social status. Her music created a connection that was immediate, intimate, and unforgettable. As the first set of melodies concluded, a gentle applause began to ripple through the room. It started with a few hesitant claps, then grew steadily as more guests joined in, some standing to show their appreciation. The young waitress looked up briefly, startled by the response, and then smiled softly, a blush coloring her cheeks. The applause was not just for her skill, but for the courage she had shown in sharing a part of herself so openly. In that moment, the nervousness that had accompanied her to the piano disappeared entirely, replaced by a quiet confidence and a sense of fulfillment. The manager approached again, this time with a warm smile and an encouraging nod. He understood the significance of what had just happened. Not only had the waitress filled the void left by the missing performer, but she had done so in a way that transformed the evening entirely. The guests were no longer simply diners. They were witnesses to something rare and beautiful. The young waitress, still seated at the piano, felt a rush of gratitude and connection. She realized that this night was not just about performance. It was about sharing a piece of herself, allowing her music to bridge the gap between her world and theirs. Encouraged by the positive response, she began a new piece, this one more complex and expressive than the first. Her fingers danced across the keys, each movement deliberate yet natural. The melody was richer, more layered, revealing the depth of her understanding and mastery of the piano. The guests, captivated once again, leaned in closer, listening intently as the music filled the room. The young waitress allowed herself to be carried by the notes, each one a reflection of her emotions, her dreams, and her quiet resilience. It was as if the piano had become an extension of herself, a voice that could speak when words were not enough. As the performance continued, the crowd's reactions became more pronounced. Some leaned back in their chairs, eyes closed, letting the music wash over them. Others whispered to one another in awe, commenting on the surprising talent of someone they had previously overlooked. A few even reached for their phones to quietly capture the moment, though most were content simply to listen and be present. The young waitress felt a deep sense of connection, understanding that her music had touched each person in a unique way. It was a powerful reminder of why she had devoted so much of her life to the piano, even in solitude. The evening progressed with the young waitress moving seamlessly between pieces, each one building on the last, creating a journey for the listeners that was both emotional and immersive. The restaurant, once a space of routine dining, had become a venue for an extraordinary experience. The guests were fully engaged, their attention held not by spectacle but by the authenticity and skill of the performance. It was a rare moment of shared humanity, a quiet miracle unfolding in the middle of an ordinary week. By the time the second set concluded, the applause had grown louder, more heartfelt. The young waitress rose from the piano bench, her hands still tingling from the intensity of the performance. She was met with smiles, nods, and quiet words of admiration from the guests. Some approached to thank her personally, while others simply lingered, savoring the lingering notes in the air. The manager, clearly moved, gave her an approving glance, a silent acknowledgement of the courage and talent she had displayed. The young waitress, still catching her breath, felt a sense of pride that was both humbling and empowering. As she returned to her duties, carrying trays with renewed grace and confidence, the atmosphere in the restaurant remained transformed. The music had created a bond among the patrons, a shared memory that would linger long after the evening ended. The young waitress moved through the tables with ease, her mind replaying the melodies she had played, each note a reminder of the power of honesty, talent, and courage. She understood now that this night, unexpected and extraordinary, was only the beginning of something far greater than she had imagined. The whispers and glances of admiration continued throughout the night, subtle but persistent. Guests who had been strangers to one another found themselves talking about the performance, sharing their amazement, and reflecting on the emotion it had evoked. The young waitress noticed the change, the way her presence was now perceived not just as a server, but as someone who had contributed something unforgettable. She smiled quietly to herself, feeling a sense of fulfillment that went beyond recognition or praise. It was the satisfaction of having shared a piece of her soul through the music she loved so deeply. As the night drew to a close and the last guests departed, the young waitress sat for a moment at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. The restaurant was quiet again, the soft glow of the chandeliers casting gentle reflections on the polished surfaces. She felt a profound sense of gratitude and wonder. One unexpected request, one moment of courage, had led to an experience that none of them would ever forget. And in that stillness, she realized that her life had changed in a way that was subtle but irreversible. The music had not only captivated the wealthy patrons that evening, but it had also awakened a new understanding within herself of her own potential, her own courage, and the undeniable power of following one's heart. The young waitress took a deep breath, her fingers hovering above the keys of the piano as she prepared for the next piece. The initial applause and admiration from the guests had given her a sense of reassurance, but she also felt the weight of expectation. She knew that the room was now fully focused on her, and every note she played would be noticed. Despite the pressure, she felt a quiet determination. This was her moment to not only play music but to tell a story through it, a story that had lived inside her for years in silence. As she began the new melody, the change in the room was almost immediate. The gentle notes started softly, like a whisper, gradually drawing the attention of every guest. Even those who had been lost in conversation now paused, their eyes turning toward her, their faces reflecting curiosity and anticipation. The music was no longer just background ambience. It was the center of the evening, the thread that connected everyone in the room, regardless of their wealth or status. Each note carried emotion, a reflection of her own experiences, her dreams, and her quiet struggles. The melody grew richer, more intricate, as she allowed her feelings to guide her fingers across the keys. The young waitress felt the music coming alive under her touch, each chord resonating with depth and meaning. She was no longer conscious of the audience. Instead, she was fully immersed in the rhythm, the flow, and the emotion of the piece. Her heart beat in time with the music, her mind completely present in the moment. It was as if the piano had become an extension of herself, a voice that could express what words never could. The guests began to lean in, their initial curiosity turning into awe. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others watched her hands move with fascination. The wealthy patrons, accustomed to luxury and high standards, were mesmerized not by grandeur or theatrics, but by authenticity and talent. There was something profoundly human about the way she played, something that reached beyond social status or appearance. The music was a bridge between worlds, creating a shared experience that was rare and unforgettable. As the piece developed, the young waitress allowed herself to explore variations, shifting from delicate, soft passages to bold, dynamic chords that filled the room with energy. The transitions were seamless, each note carefully considered yet flowing naturally, guided by instinct and emotion. The audience responded unconsciously. Some swayed slightly in their chairs, others tapped their fingers in rhythm, and a few held their breath, fully captivated by the evolving performance. The restaurant, once a space of ordinary dining, had transformed into a theater of shared human connection, and she was the storyteller at its heart. A few guests exchanged quiet remarks, impressed by her skill and the emotional depth of the music. One whispered, amazed, about how someone who had seemed so ordinary could create such an extraordinary experience. Another nodded, clearly moved, acknowledging the power of talent that often goes unnoticed. The young waitress remained unaware of the conversations, her focus solely on the keys and the music flowing through her. Yet, even without looking, she could feel the energy of the room, the way the audience was drawn into her performance, completely absorbed by the story she was telling through sound. Her fingers moved faster now, the melody becoming more complex, layered, and expressive. The music soared and dipped, carrying with it a wave of emotion that seemed to ripple through the room. The wealthy guests, who had expected a casual evening with simple entertainment, found themselves caught up in an experience far beyond their expectations. There was a sense of intimacy in the performance, as if each person present was part of a private conversation with the music itself. It was a rare and beautiful thing, a connection that could not be manufactured or rehearsed. The young waitress could feel her own heart opening as she played, each note releasing a part of her that had long been held back. She had spent years practicing in solitude, playing for no one but herself. Yet now, her music was reaching out, touching lives in ways she had never imagined. The intensity of the moment was both exhilarating and humbling. She realized that talent, when shared honestly and courageously, could create moments that lingered long after the music stopped. As the piece reached its climax, the dynamics shifted dramatically, moving from gentle, reflective passages to powerful, resonant chords that filled every corner of the restaurant. The guests were spellbound, leaning forward, their eyes wide, fully captivated by the unfolding performance. The young waitress felt a surge of emotion as she began the next piece on the piano. This time, she allowed herself to play with more intensity, letting her fingers move freely and her heart guide every note. The music was no longer just a performance. It was an expression of everything she had felt and experienced in her life. Each chord carried weight, Each melody told a story, and the audience could feel the depth of feeling behind every movement. The once quiet restaurant had become a living, breathing space filled with anticipation, emotion, and admiration. The wealthy guests, who had initially expected simple entertainment, were now completely captivated. They leaned forward in their chairs, their eyes fixed on her hands as they danced across the keys. The gentle hum of conversation had disappeared entirely, replaced by the rich sound of the piano and the soft gasps of awe from the audience. Some closed their eyes, allowing the music to wash over them, while others watched intently, mesmerized by her skill and the passion she poured into every note. The young waitress played not for recognition, but for the love of music itself, yet the effect on those around her was undeniable. As the melody deepened, she added layers of complexity, weaving together harmonies and rhythms in a way that was both intricate and natural. The music rose and fell like the tides, carrying the listeners on a journey of emotion and wonder. Her fingers moved with confidence and grace, guided by years of practice and a profound understanding of the piano. It was clear to everyone watching that this was not a simple performance. It was a display of true talent, passion, and artistry. Each note resonated in the room, leaving a lasting impression on the guests who were fortunate enough to hear it. The young waitress felt a sense of liberation as she played. She had spent so many nights practicing alone, hiding her talent, unsure of how it would be received. Now, with every note, she was sharing a piece of herself, revealing a depth of emotion and skill that few had ever witnessed. The audience was captivated not only by her technical ability but by the honesty and vulnerability of her performance. It was a reminder that true artistry comes not from showmanship, but from the courage to express oneself fully and authentically. As the piece progressed, the dynamics shifted dramatically. Soft, delicate passages were followed by powerful, resonant chords that filled every corner of the restaurant. The music was alive, moving with energy and emotion that seemed to flow directly from her heart. The guests were spellbound, leaning forward in their seats, unable to tear their eyes away from the piano. Some tapped their fingers lightly on the tables, keeping time with the rhythm, while others sat in quiet awe, absorbing every note and nuance. The young waitress was fully immersed in the music, feeling a connection with the audience that was both exhilarating and humbling. Among the patrons, whispers of admiration began to spread. They spoke quietly to one another, sharing their amazement at the talent and emotion displayed by the young waitress. A few exchanged glances, clearly impressed by how someone so unassuming could create such a powerful experience. The music transcended social boundaries, reaching each person in a unique way, touching emotions that were often left unspoken. The young waitress, focused on her performance, felt a sense of fulfillment and joy that was entirely new. She was no longer simply a server. She had become an artist, a storyteller, and a source of inspiration. The climax of the piece approached, and the young waitress allowed herself to fully express the intensity of her emotions. The music swelled, rising to a crescendo that filled the room with a powerful, almost tangible energy. The wealthy guests, who had been quietly attentive, were now fully engaged, some leaning forward in their seats, others closing their eyes to fully absorb the moment. The sound of the piano was rich and full, each note resonating with clarity and passion. It was a performance that demanded attention and respect, and the audience responded with rapt focus and admiration. The young waitress felt a sense of exhilaration as she played. She had never experienced anything like this before. The combination of her own skill, the emotion of the music, and the captivated audience created a moment that was both thrilling and humbling. She allowed herself to be carried by the music, her fingers moving with confidence and fluidity across the keys. The melodies intertwined, rising and falling in a way that was both complex and natural, creating a tapestry of sound that enveloped the entire room. The guests were drawn into the performance, their emotions mirroring the intensity and beauty of the music. As the crescendo passed, the young waitress transitioned into a softer, more reflective passage. The contrast between the powerful chords and the gentle, delicate notes created a sense of depth and emotion that resonated with the audience. Some guests wiped away quiet tears, moved by the beauty and sincerity of the performance. Others leaned back in their chairs, taking a moment to absorb the experience and reflect on the emotions it had stirred. The young waitress, fully present in the moment, felt a profound sense of connection with everyone in the room. Her music had touched them, creating an unspoken bond that was both intimate and powerful. The final notes of the piece lingered in the air, soft and delicate, gradually fading into silence. The room remained still for a moment, as if holding its breath, before erupting into spontaneous applause. The guests stood, clapping and cheering, their faces filled with admiration and wonder. The young waitress, slightly trembling, looked up from the piano, her eyes meeting those of the audience. She saw not just applause, but genuine respect, appreciation, and awe. It was a moment that would stay with her forever, a reminder of the power of courage, talent, and authenticity. The manager approached, smiling and nodding in approval. He understood the significance of what had just happened. The young waitress had not only filled the gap left by the absent performer, but had elevated the entire evening to an extraordinary experience. The guests, who had arrived expecting a routine night, were now part of something unforgettable. The young waitress felt a deep sense of pride and fulfillment, knowing that she had shared a part of herself with the world in a way that was both meaningful and impactful. As the applause continued, she prepared for another piece, this one more expressive and daring than the last. Her confidence had grown, yet she remained humble, allowing the music to guide her rather than seeking recognition. Each note, each chord, was infused with emotion and intention, creating a performance that was both technically impressive and deeply moving. The guests were captivated once again, fully absorbed in the music and the story it told. The young waitress felt a sense of liberation and joy, knowing that she was sharing something profoundly personal and beautiful with those around her. The evening continued with the young waitress moving seamlessly between pieces, each one building on the last, creating a journey for the listeners that was both emotional and immersive. The wealthy patrons, who had initially been skeptical or reserved, were now fully engaged, their attention held not by spectacle but by the authenticity and skill of the performance. The young waitress, fully immersed in her music, felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that was unlike anything she had experienced before. She had discovered the power of her talent and the impact it could have on others, and she embraced it with grace and humility. By the time the final piece of the night concluded, the room was filled with applause, cheers, and expressions of admiration. The young waitress, slightly breathless, rose from the piano bench, her hands tingling from the intensity of the performance. She had shared a part of herself, revealed her hidden talent, and created a night that would be remembered by everyone present. The piano, once a private sanctuary, had become a bridge to the world, allowing her to connect with others in a deeply meaningful way. As she returned to her duties, carrying trays with renewed grace and confidence, the atmosphere in the restaurant remained transformed. Conversations resumed, but now they were filled with references to the performance, with guests discussing the emotion, skill, and courage they had witnessed. The young waitress moved through the tables with ease, her mind still alive with the music she had created. She understood that this night marked a turning point, not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. The music had given her a voice, a presence, and a sense of possibility that was entirely new. The whispers of admiration and the glances of respect continued until the last guests departed. The young waitress finally sat back at the piano for a moment of quiet reflection. The room was calm again, the soft glow of the chandeliers casting gentle reflections on the polished surfaces. She felt a profound sense of satisfaction and wonder. One night, one performance, had revealed something extraordinary. That talent, courage, and the willingness to share oneself could create moments that were timeless and unforgettable. It was a night that would forever be remembered, not just by the guests, but by the young waitress herself, who had discovered the power of her own music in the most human and touching way. The restaurant had settled into a calm after the intensity of her last performance, yet there was a lingering energy that made the space feel different. The wealthy guests, who had initially come with casual expectations, were now buzzing with admiration and awe. They whispered to one another, sharing observations about the young waitress, her talent, and the emotions they had felt through her music. Some were visibly moved, others sat quietly, absorbing the impact of what they had witnessed. The atmosphere had shifted, leaving a memory that would linger long after the evening ended. The young waitress returned to her routine, carrying trays and serving dishes with her usual grace. Yet now there was a subtle difference in her movements. Each step felt lighter, each interaction with the guests carried a newfound confidence. She noticed the glances of appreciation and the quiet nods of respect, gestures that had been absent before her performance. Though she remained humble and focused on her work, the recognition was tangible, and she felt a quiet warmth in her chest. Her music had not only captivated the audience but had also changed the way they saw her. A few of the guests approached her directly, offering words of admiration and curiosity. They asked how she had learned to play so beautifully, expressing amazement that someone who had seemed so ordinary could possess such extraordinary skill. The young waitress smiled politely, feeling a mix of pride and humility. She responded with modesty, explaining that she had practiced in private for many years, never imagining she would perform in front of a room full of strangers. Her honesty only deepened the admiration of those around her, who sensed the authenticity behind her words and her music. As the evening progressed, a few of the guests lingered near the piano, engaging in quiet conversations with one another. They discussed not just her technical skill, but the emotional depth of her performance, the way each note conveyed feeling and story. He had witnessed many performances in the restaurant, but rarely had he seen one that so completely transformed the atmosphere and left such a profound impression on the guests. He approached her briefly, offering a nod of respect and a few encouraging words. The young waitress felt a sense of pride, tempered by humility. She knew that the recognition, while gratifying, was secondary to the joy she had found in sharing her music and connecting with others on such a deep level. A few of the more curious guests returned to their tables, reflecting on the experience and discussing the young waitress in hushed tones. They marveled at how someone who had appeared so quiet and unassuming could command such attention and admiration with nothing more than a piano and her skill. It was a reminder to them that talent often goes unnoticed, hidden behind ordinary appearances, waiting for a moment to shine. The young waitress, though unaware of every conversation, felt a sense of validation. Her years of private practice, her dedication, and her courage had culminated in a night that would be remembered not just for her music, but for the human connection it fostered. The evening began to wind down, and the guests gradually started to leave, each carrying a piece of the experience with them. Some lingered a moment longer at the piano, offering quiet thanks or a final word of admiration. Others approached the young waitress with small gestures of appreciation, some leaving tips beyond the usual, others simply expressing their gratitude for the unforgettable evening. The restaurant, which had once been filled with routine and familiarity, now carried a sense of magic and shared memory. The young waitress moved among the tables, her heart full, her mind reflecting on the events of the night. As the last guests departed, the young waitress finally found a moment to sit at the piano herself, alone. The room was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the chandeliers, and she allowed herself to breathe deeply. She reflected on the journey of the evening, the emotions she had felt, and the connection she had made through her music. It was a powerful reminder of the importance of courage, authenticity, and the willingness to share one's gifts. The piano had once been a private sanctuary, a place of solace and self-expression, but now it had become a bridge to others, a channel for human connection and understanding. The young waitress's thoughts wandered to the possibilities that lay ahead. She realized that her talent, once hidden, could open doors and create opportunities she had never imagined. Yet, more importantly, she understood that the true value of her music was not in recognition or reward, but in the ability to touch hearts and evoke emotion. That night had shown her the profound impact of sharing one's gifts with the world, and she felt a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment. The manager approached one final time, this time to offer a quiet suggestion. He mentioned that perhaps her talent should be shared more often, that others might benefit from experiencing her music as they had. The young waitress nodded thoughtfully, considering the possibilities. She had always played for herself, but now she recognized that her music had the power to inspire, to comfort, and to bring people together. It was a responsibility and an opportunity she had never anticipated, and yet one she felt ready to embrace. The young waitress spent a few more moments at the piano, letting her fingers glide over the keys, playing softly for herself. The music was gentle, reflective, and filled with gratitude. It was a personal expression of the emotions she had experienced, a way to honor the journey of the night and the connections she had made. The room, now empty and quiet, seemed to hold onto the echoes of her performance, a lingering testament to the power of courage, authenticity, and the beauty of sharing one's gifts. As she finally stood and prepared to leave, she took one last look around the restaurant, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The evening had been transformative, not just for the guests, but for her as well. She had discovered a new confidence, a deeper understanding of her own talent, and a profound appreciation for the impact of sharing her music with others. The experience had left an indelible mark, a memory that would guide and inspire her in the days and years to come. Walking to the door, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The night had been a revelation, showing her that talent, when shared with courage and authenticity, could create moments that were unforgettable and deeply human. The young waitress left the restaurant with a quiet smile, carrying with her the memories of an extraordinary evening, the admiration of those she had touched, and the knowledge that her music could continue to inspire and connect with others in ways she had never imagined. It was a night that would forever shape her, a night to remember for a lifetime. The next morning, the young waitress arrived at the restaurant with a sense of anticipation and calm she had never experienced before. The events of the previous night still played vividly in her mind. The applause, the admiration, the shared moments of emotion between her and the guests. She knew that her life had subtly shifted. Something had changed within her, a quiet confidence born from the courage to share her talent. The restaurant, too, seemed different, as if it carried the echoes of the extraordinary evening and the energy of the connections formed there. As she moved through her routine, carrying trays and serving tables, she noticed subtle changes in the staff and the patrons who had arrived early for breakfast. The waitstaff offered warm smiles, glancing occasionally at her with newfound respect. Even the regular guests, those who had not been present the night before, seemed to sense a shift in the atmosphere. The young waitress felt a sense of belonging and pride, knowing that her performance had left a mark not just on the guests, but on the very environment of the restaurant. There was a quiet magic in the air, a sense of potential that had not existed before. During a lull in the morning service, the manager approached her again. He spoke softly, expressing his continued admiration and gratitude for the impact she had made. He suggested that perhaps she could perform more often, not just on special occasions, but regularly, allowing the guests to experience the beauty of her music and the emotional connection it created. The young waitress listened thoughtfully, considering the possibilities. She had always been hesitant to share her music widely, but the response from the audience had revealed something important. Her music had the power to inspire and connect with others. Perhaps it was time to embrace that opportunity. Later that day, a few guests from the previous evening returned, seeking her out to express their appreciation personally. They spoke of the emotions they had felt, the memories the music had stirred, and the inspiration they carried with them. Their words were filled with sincerity and warmth, and the young waitress felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had always believed in the power of music, but experiencing the tangible impact it had on others was both humbling and exhilarating. Each conversation reinforced her sense of purpose and the understanding that sharing one's gifts could create profound and lasting impressions. Throughout the day, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had led to this point. She thought of the countless hours spent practicing alone, the moments of doubt and hesitation, and the quiet determination that had kept her going. She realized that the performance had been more than an act of talent. It had been a demonstration of courage, authenticity, and the willingness to take a risk. The experience had revealed not only her own potential, but also the extraordinary effects of embracing one's abilities and sharing them openly with the world. As the restaurant filled with guests for the evening service, there was a subtle anticipation in the air. Word of her performance had spread, and some guests had returned specifically to experience her music again. The young waitress felt a quiet thrill, knowing that her talent was now recognized and appreciated. She moved through her duties with grace and confidence, her interactions with guests marked by warmth and a genuine sense of connection. Each smile, each word of thanks, reinforced the transformative nature of the previous night and the ongoing impact of her music. When it was time for the evening service to quiet down, she approached the piano once more. This time, there was no need for hesitation or nervousness. She settled onto the bench, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play with the confidence and skill she had discovered within herself. The music flowed naturally, each note a reflection of her emotions, her experiences, and the lessons she had learned. The audience, both familiar and new, leaned in with attentive curiosity, ready to be carried along by the melodies she created. The performance unfolded with a sense of ease and fluidity that spoke to the deep connection she had developed with her music. Each piece was expressive and emotive, revealing layers of feeling and narrative that captivated the listeners. The audience responded with awe and admiration, their attention fully absorbed by the music and the story it told. The young waitress felt a profound sense of joy and fulfillment, understanding that this was more than entertainment. It was an exchange of energy, emotion, and humanity that transcended social boundaries. As the evening progressed, the impact of her music became increasingly apparent. Guests who had previously been quiet and reserved began to show their appreciation in subtle ways. Soft claps, nods of recognition, and quiet smiles of connection. Conversations among the staff reflected the admiration and respect for her talent, creating a sense of unity and shared purpose within the restaurant. The young waitress moved seamlessly between her duties and her performance, embodying both humility and confidence, her presence becoming a source of inspiration for all who witnessed her. During a brief pause in the music, a guest approached and asked if she had considered performing professionally. The question took her by surprise, but she smiled softly, considering the possibility. The idea of sharing her talent on a larger scale had always been in the back of her mind, but the thought had seemed distant and unattainable. Yet, after the response of the audience and the encouragement from the manager, she began to see that her music could reach far beyond the walls of the restaurant. The notion of embracing a broader stage was no longer intimidating. It was exciting and full of potential. The young waitress continued to play, allowing herself to explore new expressions and melodies with a sense of freedom she had never known. Each note was imbued with emotion and authenticity, and the audience responded with deep engagement. The music flowed effortlessly, creating a shared experience that connected everyone in the room. She felt the energy of the audience, their admiration and curiosity, and let it guide her performance without losing focus on the expression of her own heart and soul. As the final notes of the evening drifted into silence, the applause was immediate and heartfelt. Guests rose from their seats, clapping and cheering, their faces reflecting genuine awe and appreciation. The young waitress, slightly breathless and filled with emotion, smiled warmly, grateful for the opportunity to share her music and touch the lives of those around her. The manager approached once again, offering words of praise and encouragement, reinforcing the significance of her talent and the impact of her courage. In the quiet moments that followed, she sat at the piano, allowing herself to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. The restaurant, once a place of routine and familiarity, now carried a sense of magic and shared memory. She understood that the experience had changed her, not only in how others perceived her but in how she perceived herself. The music had given her a voice, a presence, and a sense of purpose that extended beyond the ordinary tasks of her daily life. The young waitress realized that the true power of her music was not in recognition or applause, but in the ability to create meaningful connections and evoke emotion. She had discovered that sharing one's talents with courage and authenticity could inspire, comfort, and bring people together in profound ways. The experience had revealed a deeper understanding of her own potential and the importance of embracing the opportunities that came her way. As the night concluded and the restaurant emptied, she sat for a few final moments at the piano, playing softly for herself. The melodies were gentle and reflective, a personal expression of gratitude for the journey, the lessons, and the connections she had experienced. The room, now quiet, seemed to hold onto the echoes of her performance, a testament to the transformative power of music and the courage to share one's gifts. The young waitress finally stood, her heart full, her mind alive with possibility. She knew that this was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter in her life. One performance, one night, had revealed the extraordinary potential within her, and she was determined to embrace it. Walking toward the door, she felt a sense of anticipation for the future, knowing that her music could continue to inspire, connect, and create moments of beauty wherever she shared it. It was a night to remember, a night that would stay with her forever, a night that marked the start of something extraordinary.